Perfect. So, hello everyone, and welcome to our monthly EORE Hour webinar series. I'm so glad you could join us today. So, this is Lubna Alem, and I'm the secretary of the Explosive Ordnance Risk Education Advisory Group. So, for those who join us for the first time, the EORE Hour webinar series is an initiative that was launched in 2021 by the EORE Advisory Group. So the webinars take place every last Wednesday of every month, for which we have hosts that present on themes and topics that contribute to the enhancement of EORE. We have had over 10 webinars since the start of this series, where EORE professionals from around the world present on their EORE projects, expertise, innovations, and exchange of knowledge. So for those who would like to review past webinars, you can check the recordings online. They are on the EORE AG YouTube channel, and I'll share with you now all the key links. They should be in the chat. And if you yourself wish to host a webinar with us this year, please get in touch with me via my email. It's also in the chat. And you can also review the concept note of the EORE Hour. So today's webinar is on leveraging AI and remote sensing technologies for EORE planning and prioritization. This is a timely and important discussion as we explore how technologies like AI, remote sensing, and interactive chatbots are transforming risk assessment and strategies in risk education. So we will hear together how these tools can help ensure that high risk areas they receive necessary attention and also making your EORE efforts more data driven and efficient. To guide us through this fascinating topic, we are happy to have a panel of experts. So we have today with us Rory Collins and Lionel Franier from UNOPS Peace and Security Cluster. We have Matteo Dulce Rubio from Carnegie Mellon University. We have Robert Clanack from MIT. And we have Deborah Asike from UNMAS South Sudan. So today's webinar will be 1 hour and we will have time for Q&A afterwards. So please leave all your questions in the chat and we will get to them in the Q&A segment. So this will be followed by a 15-minute networking circle to give you the chance to make connections and with other risk education professionals. So we hope that after the webinar, you can stay for the networking circle segment. So before we start, just a few logistical notes. So kindly please keep your mics mute during the presentations, and I invite you to submit your questions directly on the chat as we go. And in case of any technical issues, please drop me a line on the chat. So now, without further ado, Rory, I give you the floor.
Thanks very much, and thank you very much for joining, everybody. First of all, Deborah, would you mind sharing the screen so we can go to the slides? Look, we may have to bounce back and forth from a few different people because we have a couple of speakers here. But first of all, thank you very much. So I'm Rory Collins from UNOPS Peace and Security Cluster. First of all, thanks for hosting GICHD, for organizing and hosting this event. And thanks for the EORE AG for inviting us to speak. So we've been doing a lot of R&D in the last couple of years on AI and remote sensing over the last 5 years, I would say. And a key part of that has been working with leading technical universities like MIT, like Carnegie Mellon. I can see Bill on the call there from Johns Hopkins, so hopefully maybe we'll have some interesting projects going forward with them as well. But the idea there is to create a sort of a channel from where there's like the leading technical research and development in the labs, a channel directly to the personnel in the field, the ops personnel who need those tools. And I think we're doing some good work, and we have some projects we've developed over the last 3 years in particular that we want to showcase today. So we have a use case from South Sudan. So Deborah from South Sudan program will introduce the first few minutes and give a kind of a context into EORE in South Sudan, some of the challenges, and then kind of lead us into the possible solutions where AI, remote sensing, could play a role. And then Robert and some of his colleagues from MIT who worked on a project last year will present the project that they developed using different ground signals to inform operational planning and prioritization of EORE in South Sudan. We'll take a pause there for a minute, and then we'll move into the project that we did with Carnegie Mellon. Mete was on the call there. Will give us a presentation on a similar type of approach using AI. Will he explain himself, but using AI to develop a sort of a risk matrix to help manage risk in land clearance operations in Afghanistan, which is a very interesting project. And then finally, we'll have Lionel on the call as well as part of IMAT, which is the UNOPS PSC team running all these projects. We'll demonstrate the operations toolkit that we've been developing over the last, well, actually over the last couple of years, but in the last few months, we've been sort of compiling them together and hosting them on one platform. So that's the frame. We'll go back and forth from speakers. So South Sudan, Afghanistan, and then the ops toolkit. We'll take a pause after each section. Each section will be about maybe 10, 15 minutes long. And then, as noted, we'll do Q&A afterwards. So thank you very much again. Really happy to be here. And if there's no other issues, Deborah, you can lead off there, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rory. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's really a good afternoon here from Juba, South Sudan. Very sunny, so some sunshine for you. Just to give you an overview of the South Sudan program, this is the UNMAS program. The country remains really heavily contaminated with EOs because of the historical conflict that has taken place over decades. So there's a lot of landmines present, which really pose a huge risk to the communities. Obviously, we have provided EORE as UNMAS, but also as with other implementing partners and the National Mine Action Authority as well. But accidents still do happen, and children are the biggest victims, actually over 90% last year. At the same time, there is not so much resources allocated to mine action in South Sudan by the government. And so that leaves the situation or the handling of the situation to entities like UNMAS itself. It's largely manually done at the moment, and we are open to, and we have explored how AI can be used to support delivery of EORE in South Sudan. There are a lot of challenges, as always, but one of them is inaccessibility. It's a young country, so the infrastructure is not fully developed. And so sometimes, there is a known contaminated area, but it's hard to access it. The vegetation is dense in some areas. Sometimes there is flooding. And so during the rainy season, for example, our targets are constantly below average because the rains the intercommunity.
Hi, Deborah, if you can hear us, we seem to have lost you. Can you flag in the chat if you can hear me at least, or? Is there anyone else in the Juba office she's gone? Okay, I suggest we move on to she's gone, is she? She's gone from the actual call, is she? Again, the internet connection in South Sudan must be pretty bad. We had discussed this. Is she back, Deborah? Are you there?
Hear us?
Oh, apologies. We couldn't hear you at all. Maybe it's just me, but
can you hear us now?
Yeah, I can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it okay? All right. So I talked about the challenges in accessibility, insecurity, limited funding by the government itself, but also frequent movements by the populations. At the same time, we deliver the same kind of EORE to all the populations, young. And this presents an opportunity for AI and data analytics generally. Hotspots could be for accidents. If we use the data that's available, is available, analyze it, and it can provide this kind of predictive modeling, that would be a huge opportunity for AI and for the program itself. But also a lot of humanitarian actors undertake different initiatives. Some deal with refugees, some deal with internally displaced persons, some deal with food. And if AI can be used to integrate this data alongside the one from UNMAS, then it would be able it would enable us to tailor our EORE interventions as well, because we would be able to tell what kind of impact we're making. Yes, and the other one is that it would enable us then to look at EOR in a very EORE in a very holistic manner. So it's not just providing EORE or clearance for the sake of it, but it's tailoring it to agriculture, to education, and finally, it would also enable us to tailor the information itself to the different individuals, be it children, be it adults. And so, in a way, when we look at how we could apply AI to URE in South Sudan, we look at a number of possibilities. We look at how AI could enable us use patterns or determine patterns from our feedback surveys. So after an EORE session is delivered, we do undertake a survey to just understand if people's perceptions have changed, to what extent. But if we could go beyond that to look at, okay, if their risk perception has changed, how can we, what are the patterns? How, under what conditions was the EORE delivered? At what time? At what kind of category of individuals? And it would also then help us to target the EORE to the different groups, children, the ones, the displaced populations as well, and then we would tailor the risk education, accordingly. It would also help us to plan, because if you have that kind of factual information, then you're able to predetermine almost that if there's going to be a displacement, if there's going to be a lot of refugees coming from Sudan, for example, or from Uganda, then this kind of EORE should be delivered to those kinds of individuals. So that will help us to plan ahead. Yes, and it will also make us more forward-looking in terms of, at the moment, refugees will come from Sudan and will respond, and will respond and provide EORE to them. But if we have AI supporting us to predict and say, yes, there's maybe an outbreak in Sudan or in Uganda, for example, this is what we should be planning for. What's the nature of the populations moving? What are the percentages in terms of children, in terms of adults? And then we would plan ahead. So that's the context that I would like to provide at this point. And I would like to invite Robert to go ahead and share with us as well.
Thank you, Deborah. If you could go to the next slide, I think in this slide deck, whoever's going. Awesome. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Angel, who's going to explain the context of how we got involved with this project. If we go to the next slide. Angel.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I was muted earlier. We are MIT team. We collaborated with UNOPS professional like Rory and Team South Sudan in this semester-long analytics lab course. And we were very fortunate to collaborate and have this opportunity. So as Deborah mentioned earlier, for the context, South Sudan has about 340 known hazardous areas as of April last year. And we were just wondering, solutions were previously manually made, and we are wondering with the newer technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning, with the current resources of data on historical accidents, explosive ordnance locations, and migration, etc., what would be a better way to help plan and prioritize your explosives ordnance education based on the resources that we have? and I will pass on to my colleague Felicia to talk more about the data set that we have.
We go to the next slide. Felicia?
Can you see the data sets?
Yes, yes, we're looking for Felicia. Maybe she's muted right now. One second.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for unmuting me. I appreciate it. So just to give some context of the data we were given. So we were given data both from UNOPS and from the Human Data Exchange database. From the UNOPS team, we were given data on the locations of the mines and the description of them, whether they had been decontaminated or were still active. Were given information on the accidents and when they occurred, who was victim of them, and a little bit of text about the incident, as well as information about the victims, certain demographics about them, where they had come from, etc. And with this data, we were able to create some interesting insights about the accidents that occurred. And then we pulled in the immigration checkpoint data from the Human Data Exchange. This allowed us to see trends in immigration in South Sudan and neighboring countries and create even more detailed insights on these accidents and maybe how to prevent them in the future, especially as refugees are high risk for these type of accidents.
And a little more context, we were given other data sets. We found some issues with actually implementing them on a reliable basis due to the sample size that we were given with them, which we'll discuss a little later in this presentation. You go to the next slide, please. So with this data we had and with the questions that we were trying to figure out how to answer, we came up with a few objectives, and they mainly talk about the environment in South Sudan and then the movement of people, kind of like Felicia mentioned and you mentioned. So we want to understand, is there a specific high risk, or are there specific high risk areas that we should be looking at more in terms of giving EORE than others based on accident data and or both unmarked explosive ordnance and marked explosive ordnance. On top of that, we also wanted to understand, based on migration data, how people are migrating, what is their reason for migrating, and if there was anything we could figure out about where they're going based on these certain characteristics. Because if we know that, then maybe we know the more high impact routes in terms of where we need to educate people more based on where their future location is going to be rather than where they currently are. If we go to the next slide. So to do this, we grabbed the explosive ordnance contamination data set and the spot task data set. The contamination data set is any explosive ordnance that has been, or that is still currently on the ground, right? Or in the area. Whereas the spot task data set, from how we understood it, is the explosive ordnance that was historically removed from a certain area. So we use both of them as kind of a comparison to understand, okay, historically, where has EO been removed? And then currently, where is the EO now? And this is an awesome data set because it gave it with context to certain important resources in the area. And the reason we went this route is because we think it's important if people are going to these important resources, what is the danger that they might face in terms of where they are going to possibly encounter explosive ordnance. So what we found in the data set was that the closer you are to certain infrastructure like agriculture and roads, the closer explosive ordnance is to those important pieces of infrastructure. And then, of course, as the farther you get away from those, the less likely there is for EO to be there. One important thing to note there is it makes a lot of sense based on the historical accidents that we saw in terms of their locations. A lot of them were, near agricultural areas or near roads. We had some accident-based descriptions as well of, what happened during the accident. Some of them were from gardening, things like that. We also noticed that other infrastructure like buildings such as schools and hospitals the farther you get away from them, the explosive ordnance was more likely to be there, which meant that luckily explosive ordnance isn't near a lot of those buildings and most likely city centers. If we go to the next slide. So what we did is we looked at that for each city as well to kind of understand, okay, does this relationship hold across each major, I think we picked, like city area. And what we noticed is that for both the spot test data set and the active EO data set as well, that the closer you are, again, we see roads and agriculture as the like more lit up areas. So if you look at the top two, you'll notice some of them are lighter than others. Again, those are the infrastructure that we talked about before. And then as you get farther away, so as you go down in those graphs, you'll notice that, it gets brighter and everything, but those two mainly showing that as you get farther away from some of those, pieces of infrastructure like, hospitals and schools, you are less likely to encounter, or you are more likely to encounter explosive ordnance the farther away you are. Again, this is important because when you're giving explosive ordnance risk education, we're hoping that UNMAS can emphasize the importance of educating people on roads and agriculture being, big areas where they may encounter these issues. If you go to the next slide, please. So, and then could you click yeah, there you go. Yeah, so this is a great example of what we see when we overlay the roadmap with both marked EO, unmarked EO, and accidents. We'll notice that it pretty much traces the roads very well. And again, this kind of confirms what we saw in the actual data that came from the other two data sets in terms of this being a very high risk area, which makes a lot of sense. And that's kind of why we wanted to look at migration next, because if migrants are traveling, on certain roads, and these roads are more likely to have explosive ordnance than, other areas, then it's important that, these migrants understand the risks associated with that travel. And Felicia did a lot of that work with migration, so I'm going to hand it over to her next. If you go to the next slide.
Yes. So for this segment of the project, we were working with mainly the data from the Human Data Exchange, trying to see, are there certain patterns that we see in migration that affect where these refugees are traveling to? And if so, if we're able to predict that, are we able to give them tailored ordnance risk education in order to help them be better prepared for if they encounter these areas. So we used classical machine learning to conduct this, and we started with a more simpler model, and we found that the method of transportation is one of the most important factors when trying to predict this, which makes sense. In South Sudan right now, there's a lot of issues with climate affecting the way that people move. So if they have to modify that the way they travel, maybe they'll move to a different area, either to a different country or within South Sudan itself. And then whether these people are voluntarily returning is also a big factor, which also in context makes sense, as if they're returning to family, for example, maybe they'll move a different way than if they're fleeing to South Sudan.
Next slide, please.
And then we, for our next model, we used a bit more of a complicated algorithm and just to cross-validate what we had found in the simpler one. And we also found that the mode of transportation is super important. Also, the number of individuals traveling in a group makes sense, whether it's a single individual, maybe a family, extended family traveling together, will affect whether or not, they're moving to one region or another, and whether they are male or not. So with these insights, we're able to see that maybe if we're seeing people travel in a certain mode of transportation, we're able to tailor our ordnance education accordingly.
Next slide, please.
Yeah, so to summarize our findings and recommendations in the project, our analysis really leveraged various techniques to identify actionable items and insights for EORE planning and prioritization. Our MIT project really are in three folds. Just to recap, the first one, Robert just mentioned through kernel density estimation, we pinpointed high-risk areas based on proximity to critical infrastructure such as roads and agriculture, offering guidance on where the EO are against those important infrastructure, and in the future how the educational resources could be laid out that would be the most impactful. And secondly, like Felicia introduced, migration analysis review key drivers of movement where it can help tailor your RE sessions accordingly to people on the move from their departure locations to their end destination locations. And in the end, we also did some side analysis on the interpretable accident clustering side. We wish to uncover underlying patterns of accidents, maybe to answer question like if seasonality is driving the accident, or locations or age or demographics of the people are correlating with accident. However, when it came to this branch, the results were inconclusive due to high levels of noise in the dataset, limited features, and essentially what might appear to be random patterns of the accident in the dataset. So this also indicate that maybe future research might be needed. So looking ahead, we recommend integrating external dataset that might be useful, including more granular features, as well as internal data set like accident and victim for deeper insights and tailoring regional analysis to enhance EORE strategies locally. With also like external data set we mentioned, maybe like population density maps or refugee IDP camp location, it would significantly strengthen future predictive analysis as well. So by focusing on these improvements, we can better support your planning and ultimately reduce the risk being posed by explosive ordnance in South Sudan. And that would conclude the MIT project with you.
I would like to add one more thing. Deborah mentioned these post tests and these like sentiment tests that they give people who take EORE sessions. They're a great resource. We looked through the data set we were given with this data. The big issue there, like I was talking about with sample size, is that we're only taking the people who are getting EORE education, which means we don't know if maybe they're more at risk and that's why they're getting the education, or they don't have that knowledge to begin with. So a better way of going about this, if anyone's thinking of implementing something like this in another part of the world, is making sure that you're taking a sample of the education level of the population in that place that you're giving the explosive ordnance risk education to. This is really important because it allows you to establish a baseline understanding of what the knowledge is in that village or town, so that then you can compare the people who are actually getting the education and how that necessarily affects the village over time in terms of their attitude and thoughts around explosive ordnance. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Robert, MIT team, and Deborah from South Sudan and your team as well. Fascinating and always a pleasure working with MIT. The research you're doing is fantastic. So thank you so much for that. Just given time, we have half an hour left with two more projects to cover. The next one is a project that UNOPS ran with Matteo from Carnegie Mellon. As it says there, planning prioritization tool and AI-informed risk management tool. So yeah, please over to you, Matteo, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Rory. And hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to talk about a similar approach to a data-driven understanding of EO contamination and risk management, in this case, focused on Afghanistan. But something that I think it's also true with South Sudan data is that this kind of data-driven tools are transferable, generalizable to other contexts and approaches tailored to their specific patterns of EO contamination. So in this case, we focused on Afghanistan. Next slide, please. Where we're interested in developing these contamination risk matrix using AI. So imagine this is, for example, the context of Afghanistan. We have 5,000 active hazards in the country from its long conflict. And what we wanted to understand is what of these suspected hazard areas were actually contaminated. So next, what we can do with AI is to use historical data of confirmed hazard areas, canceled areas that has been already investigated by humanitarian demining teams, put that with an AI model with some input variables. Think of similar features that we were looking before: distance to roads, proximity to schools or buildings, some geographical variables such as altitude or rainfall, remnants of war indicator like previous EO accidents or presence of different armies. And the AI will learn like correlation between these two patterns. And that's what exactly this kind of models do. They're able to differentiate between what features, what characteristics of a specific hazard, of a specific area of interest will make it more likely to be a confirmed hazard, and what other features will make them more likely to be a canceled area. So we want to understand what factors can indicate a higher likelihood of contamination, and that can directly inform EO risk education, in this case, understanding what are those geographic factors that are there. So next, please. So the output, the final result from like this kind of approach is to have a final risk matrix that looks like this Excel sheet, that for each of these active hazard, for each of these areas of interest, will provide a risk score, thinking of like a 0 to 1 or 0 to 100% likelihood of being contaminated, and we can assign a risk category here. But more importantly, since we are able to learn that those correlation between predicted features and likelihood of EO contamination, we are also able to use that to inform EORE. Next. So to give more detail, what we need here, what we use here in the context of Afghanistan, was historical hazardous areas that were already surveyed by humanitarian demining teams and were classified as canceled areas or not canceled areas. And the thing that we wanted to estimate is a contamination risk score for active suspected hazard areas. So contamination risk score, meaning the likelihood that they will not be canceled, that they will be confirmed as hazardous areas. And we use 76 predictive features, ground signals, that can broadly be classified between geographic features, geographic attributes. Think of the slope of the terrain, the altitude, the elevation, or the soil texture, the rainfall, the weather in a certain territory. Some demographic variables that indicate human presence, proximity to school, roads, building, financial districts, road network of the country, and finally some conflict indicators such as victims of the conflict, displacement, refugees, previous EO accidents, among many others. So we got in total 76 predictive features, and again, these are all going to be fed to the machine learning system to try to learn what these features are telling about whether an area is going to be confirmed as a hazard area or is going to be canceled. Next. So we train a variety of machine learning systems, some that has been recently proposed in the academic literature, specifically for the task of estimating contamination risk. And the final result that I would like to highlight here is when you do like this kind of validation on an unseen portion of the data, we observed that among the top 10% of those like areas of interest that were ranked with the highest estimated risk scores, 98% of them were actually contaminated, giving us a good level of trust of these systems are actually learning how to differentiate between areas that will be canceled from those that will be confirmed as hazardous areas. Next slide. But as I mentioned, one of the features or the characteristics of the properties that we can ask to these machine learning systems is for them to be interpretable. And that can really inform EORE. Next slide. So for instance, if we take this global feature importance in a similar approach as in the South Sudan case, we can see which features are being used by the system to make their predictions. So the system is using some of these 73 predictive features to generate these risk scores to say, okay, you should prioritize this area, not this area. These are more likely to be contaminated from these other polygons. So what we want to understand is what are those like patterns or features that are indicating a higher estimated risk of contamination. In this case, for Afghanistan, those 5 top features were distance to previously confirmed contaminated areas. So that's a clear indicator that EORE can use to inform communities to avoid approaching or going near areas that have been previously confirmed to be contaminated. But also we found, for example, in a similar to the previous project, that the distance to railways was a big indicator of EO contamination that can be interpreted as this being a target in the conflict, the railways as a means of transportation across the country, as well as financial institutions or the elevation of the rainfall of a territory. So this can really be used to understand what are those factors that can increase or that are signals of increased risk of EO contamination. Next. But more importantly, this risk matrix also gives like a specific local relevant predictors. So for each of the areas of interest that I show that it has like the risk score and risk category, we also have a feature importance of, okay, for this specific area, why is the system saying that this area of interest is 39% risk and this other is 64% risk? And you can see, okay, it's because it's near this specific village, it's also close to these roads, it is close to the railways, so you can also like understand why a specific area, think province, things like different administrative geographic level, can also be, we can also understand what factors are driven EO contamination in this specific territory, and again, use that to inform risk education programs. Next. And this should be thought as an additional input of information. We saw that there's like a current trend to use, let's say, a priority score, understanding what is the most important areas in terms of impact, and say, for example, what are the areas that are more populated by vulnerable communities, or what areas can be used for economic purposes, for environmental restoration. And that's the x-axis here, the priority score, how important it is for us to conduct demining operations, land use operation in certain regions. But we are like suggesting or advocating for use this additional contamination risk score that indicates not only where landmines or EO have been found or already identified, but also where they could be, that we don't have any information there. What is the missing part of our data sets right now that only focus on previous reports, but we also want to understand where additional contamination is. And these 2 layers of information are not that correlated, and they should be weighted in some way to really inform what factors can give more likelihood of contamination, but also at the same time targeting those communities that are most in need. So yeah, thank you. Happy to discuss in more detail or take any questions later.
Thanks very much, Mateo. Excellent. We'll have a Q&A at the end of this anyway, so we can go into if anyone has any questions about it. So this is the 3rd section. So UNOPS PSC, IMAT team, myself and Lean are on that team, and we run a lot of these projects that you've just seen with MIT, with Carnegie Mellon, etc. But we also try and take the solutions and try and globalize them into an operationally accessible toolkit. We've done some examples in Gaza, for example, where we host different operational information to make planning and prioritization easier. But what we've done with this EORE is develop a sort of toolkit with a number of different components that would help take the components that you just saw from South Sudan and Afghanistan in using AI, but layering it with more remote sensing technology, as well as Gen AI technology, so chatbots. So basically try to create a suite of tools that operational personnel could use if they wanted to have a more informed approach to planning prioritization of their EORE. So I'll hand it over to Lionel. Thank you very much, Lionel, and we can go through the tools, the presentation for a few minutes, and then we'll do a demo as well. So thank you very much, Lionel. Over to you, please.
Thanks, Rory. Hi, everyone. All right, so what we've done here, as Rory said, is a toolbox. It's basically, it summarizes what what has been said so far by Matteo and the MIT team. And it may sound like magic, like AI stuff, and we wanted to provide this toolbox or toolkit just for the users, the ops, the programs, the EORE specialists to be able to interact with these tools, with these AI-powered tools to to plan, prioritize, to do some informed planning. So it's a very simple procedure, I would say, or approach where we take some data. We first perform a threat analysis. So we try to understand through the accident, in this case, why there may be a threat in some areas. And from that, we try to prioritize the EORE to give information where we should go and do the EORE. So yeah, with the ultimate goal to do some informed planning. So we've took data from South Sudan in our case. You can take many indicator, many data sets, like Matteo presented before. He took almost 100 of them. You can source them from open source, OpenStreetMap, HTX, some flood data that I may present later that need to be pre-processed, post-processed. Some imagery, you can take also all your internal data set that have been validated. And just here, I will do a little pause. I think for you, it's also important to understand with these high-tech academic works that have been done, at the end, there is always some kind of suggestions, what's next, etc. And it gives you information management officers or EORE specialists, it gives you also the maybe some clue on what kind of data can be gathered and why it is important to gather this data and to validate, in fact, information, because it can be then run inside these models and give you better insight. So yeah, that's my parenthesis there. You have a data set, a selection of data sets that will constitute somehow all the influencing factors, the factors that may change the way EORE is planned. Once you have these factors, we will do the threat analysis. So we take, in this case, only the EO-related incident, unlike what MIT has done, taking the processed EO, marked, unmarked EO. Here we take only the incident. We input some parameters inside this AI system, and it will give us a mapping of the threat. Once we have that, we compare with the past EORE session. Again, we tweak a little bit the parameters, and it gives us a prioritization mapping. And this, with the other tools that may be present, that will be present in the toolbox, chatbot, I don't know, flood analysis, anything, will enable data-driven planning, and all this part of a desk assessment, and this will enable some more, I think, safe, more efficient operations. So this toolbox here has been done for EORE in South Sudan, but of course it's highly scalable. We can do that at, I don't know, a regional level, and we can do that for another region, for smaller areas as well, as long as we have the data. We can adapt it to any mine action activity, like Matteo have been presenting. It's kind of similar. You can do that for basically anything, mine action or not related to mine action, by the way. It will give you an unbiased prioritization. It will remove the, let's say, the prioritization by gut feeling. This may not be the most efficient way of prioritization. So here it's unbiased. You can tailor it by playing with the weight, with the data set, with the way the AI model will interact. You can tailor it to reach specific goals, like the SDGs, for example. If you want to increase the force quality in education, you may want to, I don't know, weight a little bit more the schools in your EORE prioritization. So this can be done thanks to these AI models as well. As I said, it's safe, efficient, because all this is done during a desk assessment, and taking, for example, security or budget factors into consideration. So again, fully tailorable, fully scalable. So I will show you how it looks like. So it's a pretty simple tool here where we do first the threat analysis. In our case, we decided to do it at the admin 2 level in South Sudan. You cannot run this only at country level because there are a lot of different parameters that may have another influence, I would say, in the threat analysis. So here we do it at admin 2 level. So we can select some admin 2s here. We have all the admin 2s of South Sudan, and we just hit run analysis. And what this will do right now is try to understand what are the parameters that influence the probability of accident in one specific admin 2. It gives some accuracy. Here it's a random forest model algorithm used. So yeah, it's interpretable. And for example, 100 accuracy score is likely not that true, but still you can go and look what the model did, as Matteo was showing before. Also, there is a thing here that we did with this model is to overcome this random pattern that MIT was talking about. We took one main factor, and which is the population density. You can use, for example, population patterns, migration patterns instead of population density. So if you want to tailor to a specific goal, here it's population density. So for firing, which this accuracy, it's likely because there were not enough data for the model to understand. So it took only population density to do the analysis. So now it's done. Let's navigate to the tab. We have the analysis with all the scores, similar than what Matteo was showing. So we have the importance for these, I don't know, 9 factors. So can be added as well. Population density, flood, roads, proximity, healthcare, proximity, safety, that's police, firefighter, etc. Education, water, traffic, and transport. So they are all mostly based on proximity, but flood, that is weighted according to the flood risk, and yeah, population density, that is weighted through the density. So it gives for each and every admin 2 that has been analyzed this kind of table where you can understand what is the most important factor and what the model did. And yeah, as we saw in Chobet, is the population density the unique one. Then it will give you a map with this score. So white being low probability and red being high probability. We see in most of the admin 2, it's very close to the roads, or here population density mixed with some schools, etc. But it gives you a map of the threat, the probable threat of explosive ordnances, again based on the accidents that already happened. That's the first step. If you want to go a little bit deeper in the understanding of how the model performs, it gives you estimators. So it's a random forest. It runs 100 in this model, estimate trees like this, let's say, to classify this or to create this map. It looks like hard to read, but it's not that hard to read, in fact. And if you are interested to really understand why an accident may happen, well, you have the possibility, thanks to the random forest, that is kind of interpretable. So great, we have our threat analysis. Now, second step will be to do the EORE prioritization. Here, what we will do is filter out the EORE sessions that have already been done in a certain time frame. Here I selected in the last year, and I created a 5,000 meter buffer around these places where sessions have been taking place. Yeah, so here you can tailor this buffer or do another kind of buffer that is not circular, based on the I don't know, how you think your EORE session had influenced the people and how the knowledge had spread. But in our case, very simple. We define date time frame, sorry, and a buffer. And let's run the analysis. It should take dozens of seconds. You can see, by the way, it's pretty quick. You don't have to wait for the model to think and all that. It's pretty quick. As a matter of seconds, you have your results. And these are the results for the admin to have been choosing, with green being no priority or risk, and black the highest probability or risk. It gives a map. Here, let's superimpose the EORE that have been filtered out. So these are the area where people most likely have the knowledge already of risk education. And if you zoom in, you see that there are areas that are kind of outside. Let's say that's close to Bentiu, I think. Yeah, you can zoom in and see that here there are places that have been identified high risk, high probability of risk, and with no EORE has been done in the past year. You can check if all the EORE sessions, you have been doing South Sudan some EORE sessions here, but not since the last year. So this will give you a map, basically, of places where you may want to prioritize your EORE session based on the accidents and based on the past EORE sessions. So the toolbox also contains, well, a kind of simple maps where you can add whatever you want. There is a chatbot that has been put here as well. So this chatbot takes sources in validated NMAS data and is multi-language. It will basically, the user can ask anything. I prepared some prompts here in French. How many sessions in South Sudan in 2023? I ask answer in Spanish, and it does ask in Spanish with the correct number, 5,240. Well, South Sudan team maybe don't, these are dummy data. And well, you can ask in English how many beneficiaries in South Sudan with a typo. Still, it will understand, so like ChatGPT will do in June 24, and there were close to 32,000 beneficiaries. So these chatbots are a way of interacting with the data other than using dashboards or Excel sheets. And I could ask him here, I didn't put that in the data set, the model, the chatbot will query, but you could put, I don't know, the IMAS, for example, and you can ask what will be the best way of providing education for this kind of the population. It will read the IMAS, the PDF, or the latest IMAS and provide you with guidances. And yeah, last step will be you can export the maps and all the results into your Google Drive, and then you will be able to interact with a more, let's say, map-based tool for the information management officer to assist the EORE specialist in doing this prioritization. That's it for this tool, Rory. I don't know if you want me to go through the flooding and all that.
Yeah, that'd be great, actually, because the flooding is quite relevant to some AOIs.
All right.
We have a few minutes anyway. We have till 9, yeah. Okay,
so the flood, what we have been doing in the flood is we've taken some information from NASA, so that's purely remote sensing. NASA, they have two main satellites called Aqua and Terra that they do kind of analyze the content of water over the soil, and yeah, the result of this analysis is the flood, basically. And what we have done for South Sudan, but as well for other countries, we've analyzed these terabytes of data to classify them as where we have more than 90 days a year of flood, between 30 and 90, and less than 30 days per year of flood. We have done this analysis on 4 years of NASA data, and it gives us a map of let's say, the flood risk over an area. It's quite precise. I would say this black or this hole here is in fact the UNMAS camp in Bentiu. So highly likely no flooding here. It will have been built in a way that avoid flooding. And so this is one of the data set we use to do the prediction based on flood. We can also use another kind of data set that is coming from ESA, the European Space Agency, coming from Sentinel, and here we have a high resolution, in fact, map of the flood, where we can even see the building in the UNMAS camp. So yeah, we have this kind of things we can do for flooding in terms of planning prioritization, and also understand the risk of flooding. Once we have this flooding, we can also do kind of simulation of the flood, given that we have some what called digital surface mapping, so a very precise understanding of how the terrain looks like. We can put features such as building and then run an analysis. So this is 400 millimeter per hour of water over a region of the Caribbean, and you can see the flow of water coming from the top of the hill downhill, and identify in fact areas where the water will most likely be prone to stay, or if we translate that to mine action, where explosive ordnance is moving because of a flow of water, will the most likely be after the flood. This can also help you prioritize area at a more granular, in a more granular way, and that's kind of what we do with flood data and 3D modelization, in fact.
And Lionel, I'm so sorry to interrupt there. Just the colleagues from South Sudan need to leave, and there's some questions regarding the adoption of the first MIT AI project into their operational planning. So maybe I'll give them the floor if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. In the room, we have our Chief of Operations, William Miner. We have our Chief of Mine Action Program, Zed, on top of Betty and Nicholas, who are introduced earlier. We have to leave in 2 minutes, and I'll invite William to kindly respond some of the questions directed to us. William, over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you very much, colleagues. And quickly, just to answer that, yes, we've not yet deployed the use of AI yet, because certainly we're still learning it, and it's not formally rolled out. But this is interesting, and it's giving us some insights that we can deploy in the near future, certainly from the next season that is starting in July 1st onwards. Over. Can you hear us?
Can you hear us?
Yeah, that was perfect. Is that it, Deborah? Is that the feedback? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. That was excellent. I think it was actually Amir who had asked that question. And I think the same question was asked in context of Afghanistan. Mateo, are you still on the call? Do you want to field this, or I can if you want?
If you can, I'm answering some questions in the chat.
All right.
I wanted to answer before, yeah. But I'm happy to jump in.
Well, if you can, the answer is no, Amir. We had some, we had the operational team had access to the risk matrix and the prioritization scoring, etc. But it came at a time when stopped, so it didn't move forward, unfortunately. But it still sits there, if that makes sense. That answer your question, I think, and looking through the questions are coming pretty heavy there. I just want to ask a question here. Are we supposed to move into breaking rooms? Because it is the end of the session. I was on the impression GSHD. Are we breaking into a Q&A session, or do you just continue on with this?
I think now you can move to Q&A, and afterwards we go to breaking rooms.
All right. And do I go through each question, or do you?
No, you can go ahead. I don't think we have time for all of the questions, but you can choose 1 or 2 questions that we can answer before we wrap up.
All right. I think there was a question there from Michael Barry and thumbs up by
I
Bill.
can add an input on Michael's question that there's some interest. We agree that that military information can also be very important in these cases. As I mentioned, we try to like group variables between like geographic features that are like physical aspects of the terrain that can increase or decrease the likelihood of contamination. Think of the slope of the terrain, the weather related to flooding, all of those like geographic characteristics of a place that can indicate an EO contamination. Then more social demographic variables that indicate human presence, commercial activities. And then we had like a third group that was like conflict indicators that can be really is very similar to what you're thinking. So we have some proxies for those kind of military presence in different areas, but in particular, the one that you're mentioning is not available to us. So I would say that one restriction in all of these efforts is still like we're using like open source data. We still need to, there's some issues with data availability, but of course, as we have more data, we understand more of the context that can also like relate to scalability of this kind of efforts. You still need to tailor these different models to a specific context in each area, fitting the model with relevant features, understanding the different patterns or context and dynamics of the conflict in each territory, and having data available is key to unlock all of these potential benefits of AI-informed land release and mine action and EORE in general.
Thanks, Matteo. There was another question from Anders down below, was kind of echoed the same kind of question. Anders, I don't know if that answered your question, but one thing that's quite significant is in the last couple of years, we spent a lot of time creating these networks of information management systems. So a lot of the stuff you're looking at right now is information that's collected on, well, for UNMAS example, the UNMAS information management system, the data collection, etc. And UNOPS PSC developed that system. So we are now in a place where we're trying to connect that system with other partners. And there's a lot of information to be gathered there. So while we're collecting information, let's say with OCHA or UNDP systems or different IPs, etc., it is possible to do that. But then what sort of information is being allowed to be shared is a different question altogether. But Anders, I don't know if that answers your question, because it seems yours is a bit more layered than Michael's. Are you still on the call or no? I'm going to assume not, if that makes sense. If Amir is still on the call, there was a question about scalability. My second question about scalability, threat and driving factors behind the prioritization might differ. I can't unmute myself. Apologies. Can someone please unmute some co-host, because I don't know how to do that. In terms of scalability, Amir, if you are on the call, it is absolutely scalable, and it is largely dependent on the data quality. We are looking at, I'm not going to go into the details here, but we are looking at different ways to cultivate information in a more decentralized way that may help. But in terms of, if we have the data, it can be scaled for sure. In both cases. In fact, the AI approach is absolutely scalable, but also the tools that Lionel showed you, as he mentioned, are absolutely scalable as well. It's a matter of the quality of the data. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Similar models. Did anyone get able to unmute Anders? And Anders, do you have a follow-up question? Are you okay?
Well, I'm fine. Yes, thank you very much for asking. I don't have a follow-up question as such, just a clarification on the last bit of my question, and that is, when it comes to places like Afghanistan, where there's been a lot of asymmetrical fighting taking place, and I'm aware that the priority for both risk education and clearance and everything else, of course, is around the more populated areas, which it should be. But there are also a lot of tasks historically in Afghanistan where it's not around the populated areas, where it is development areas, where not much reporting has taken place, and where the only bits and pieces of information there is are with the mine action centers or with either coalition forces or the Afghan government in one way or another. Same goes for other countries around the world. I'm just wondering if there's any of the data that is available that can be put into the model and potentially predict where those suspected hazardous areas could be confirmed hazardous areas, putting it in a different context, but the likelihood of them then being confirmed through this model.
I can answer that question. That's very correct. I would say that that's exactly one of the motivation to use this kind of predictive modeling instead of relying just on observational data. The data sets on confirmed hazard areas, suspect hazard areas, or accidents are those that have been reported by civilians or by the communities or by the army in their operations. So those are the ones that we have already observed. And what we want to get with these models is like to extrapolate that pattern of observing EO contamination to areas that can have like less presence of the state or capacity to collect all of this information. So we're really trying to exactly estimate where other contaminated areas could be that we don't have any records yet there. So we're really trying to do exactly that, and not only like rely on historical data, but actually extrapolate that to other territories that maybe we don't have as good as data quality that we have by learning the patterns here. There is some issues with how stable these patterns are across territories, and we have some robust, let's say, experiments or exercises in our data driven efforts to see how we can reweight the data to still be for the models to be equally good across different environments. Let's say we have done this in Colombia specifically to check how known patterns of contamination can then be transferred to newly territories that were like available for the state after the peace agreement in 2016. So that's a great question, and we're really trying to use this AI modeling to get new information in those unobserved territories.
Yeah, there's some comments on the answers there as well from Bill and Michael talking about the need for data sharing agreements and contracts in the context of Ukraine, for example. So I'm just going to scroll up there. I can't remember if we have 15 minutes for this, but I think Amir also asked a question. Sorry, no, it's Beatrice. Lionel, I don't know if you want to take this one, but it's the comment great tool. Lionel, you mentioned the inclusion of SDG related information in the tool. I assume this means priority setting based on information. I'm sure you can all read this, but Lionel, if you want to field that, and then we can talk more broadly about SDGs after that. But if you want to take the first.
I guess we can use a similar tool to understand what was the impact on SDGs. I mean, the proximity approach we've taken can be used there. I mean, you need to understand how your recessions have contributed to let's say schools or agriculture based on proximity, but you can also use the model to map the extent of the knowledge. I mean, how the knowledge will have been spread. Well, the EORE people, I think, surely know that the knowledge spread like a disease, if I may say. There are models of epidemiology that can be used for knowledge, and that can be fed into our model to understand what was the actual impact. So I would say not the approach we've taken was for a very specific purpose, but we can tweak the approach for understanding the impact of prioritization on the SDGs. This we can do, yeah.
I don't know if Beatrice is on the call there. There's one other thing, just a little bit broader than that specific question, is the influence of remote sensing on the SDG policy. So at the moment UNOPS PSCI matter trying to help with the SDG policy, trying to adopt remote sensing indicators, contributions to the SDG, into the policy that allows them. Currently, doesn't seem to be a channel through which, when we measure contributions of projects to SDGs, remote sensing technology doesn't seem to have a place there yet. So it's more statistical based. So we're trying to influence that policy as well. So just to let you know that the SDG framework, while it has indicators that we try to align with and trying to measure against the framework, it will hopefully change to allow more remote sensing indicators to be adopted. So I know that's not answering your question, but just so you know, there's a lot of changing going on, hopefully changing going on the SDG framework as well, in terms of the contributions that can be measured. I would say take another question, skip the network circle, and skip the network circle. There is so much interest in this topic. So do you want us? Yeah, we can wrap up now. If anyone wants to beyond, I think Henrique, you have a question there. Maybe that's the last one. Beyond the location of hazardous areas, are you looking into how these areas look like? For example, size, density, and shape of minefields, types of EOs, and so on. Henrique, do you mind? Could I ask you? Do you have any specific use case in mind, like the South Sudan or the Afghanistan, or what IMAT is demoing through Lean, or is it just more global question? General, so we don't really, and we probably could, but look, there's how these look like in terms of size, density, and shape of minefields. Like we do know from the different hazardous data. I think there's another question coming in. We don't. It really depends. To answer your question, like we have the non-technicals and the technical surveys that gives us information about where there's CHAs and SHAs. Are you asking if we know then if once they do a confirmed hazardous area that they then, once they find an ordnance, unexploded or some ERW, I am unable to unmute. Okay, so sorry. If someone can please unmute. I'm asking if the predicted models. It'd be easier if you could unmute. Maybe I'll try and get you on there because I.
Okay, yeah, I can.
Yeah.
If I understand correctly. Okay, go ahead, please.
Henrique, are you able to speak now or?
Now I
Still
am, yeah. I'm asking if, because the predictive models are trying to predict the location of hazardous areas, right? But also predicting how these minefields are going to look like, how these areas are going to look like in terms of type of EO, shape, size, and so on. Because maybe you can have a bunch of defensive large density minefields versus scattered mines, random mines, and so on.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, I would say there are like two cases. For instance, in the Afghanistan case, we already had a lot of non-technical survey conducted in the country. So we already had like the suspected hazard areas. We have like predefined polygons that we were like estimating the risk of contamination for the given like polygon area, so whatever shape, size it has, we were predicting at the polygon like level, how likely for that specific area to be contaminated. There's some like ideas on how we can like use these kind of models to do like more of a reducing of the areas, like to give them like we have like suspect hazard areas, can we actually like reduce to a more specific confirmed zone? But that's like an ongoing work. I would say that in the Colombian case, where we didn't have like these predefined areas and we had like just new territories that we were trying to estimate contamination there, we used like a homogeneous grid cell where we like estimate contamination risk scores for each specific grid cells, and then we all like group them using some like geographic clustering techniques to get like final like cohesive hazard areas that make sense as suspected hazard areas. And in that case, we would like also predict the shape and the size of these priority areas. But in either case, we would not predicting like the density or like the type of EO present there. That's like more like, I would say, like context dependent. But yeah, depending on the level of prediction you're making, if you have like this predefined polygons that you already like have surveyed and have a sense of these are suspected hazard areas that I want to prioritize or not, then you predict at the polygon level. If you've had like no information, you can do like a general map and then like clusterize high risk areas to get still like cohesive priority zones.
Thanks, Matteo. I think we're going to hand it back over to the coordinator's note for the breakout sessions. Thanks, that was excellent. Cheers.
So thank you very much. And as we wrap up today's webinar, I want to thank our speakers, Rory, Lionel, Deborah, Matteo, Angel, Felicia, and Robert. I hope I didn't forget anyone. It was indeed a very rich session, and you shared your expertise, and it was very hands-on and very informative. Indeed, this has been a very timely and important discussion, as we need to explore how to use existing technologies to enhance the efficiency of our activities in mine action and also in the risk education sector. And we need to adapt to new and challenging realities and to seek new opportunities. So a big thank you as well to all of our audience for joining us and engaging with this topic. And we hope that the discussion has provided you with approaches that you can consider in your work. So indeed, the discussion, as you see, it generated a lot of engagement, and the EORE Hour became an EORE Hour and a half. So for the sake of time, I think we can skip the networking circle, the breakout rooms for this webinar, because I thought it would be better to use this time and allocate this time for questions. So indeed, you have my email. If there are any other questions or any other inquiries, I can connect you with the speakers. And yeah, thank you very much for staying with us for this time, and for the speakers for their patience and their open heart, and for sharing all this knowledge with us. And I'm going to be sending